Welcome to Practically Pastoring, a podcast by pastors for pastors who want to share ideas, become better shepherds, and have a good time with friends. I am one of your hosts, Frank Gill, up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My buddy all the way in Baltimore, Maryland, Jeff Simpson.
Hey, guys.
Down in Sumter, South Carolina, my other very reformed friend, Delmar Pete.
So good to see you.
And together, streaming in the jewel of Tampa Bay, Safety Harbor, Florida, Andrew Larson.
It's not nice to make fun of people, guys.
And
it's not
Timothy
kind.
Miller.
I'm just tired.
Tim didn't like our joke.
Listeners, I'm sorry. I did a false take on this. My voice cracked a little bit. And they decided to mock me. But how you guys doing?
Well,
we'll be doing a lot better after the Lightning victory tonight.
Yes. Yeah, buddy.
All right, cool.
Hey, so I got into DMs with a couple guys from Tampa, Jonathan and Keena. They asked a question on their Facebook story about hockey. So I had to let them know that, yes, you can change players in the middle of a game. I described what icing was in a message, which ended up being pretty long. And I think I also described how offsides works. So you're welcome, guys. See you tonight for the game.
That sounds like the conversation I had with my wife on Saturday during the game. So well done.
I feel like icing is the hardest one for people to get.
It is.
It
doesn't make sense.
It's just a delay of game, basically.
Exactly.
Why don't they just call it that?
Because it's hockey.
Yep.
Yeah.
I will say hockey is the one sport that I think I could get into.
Listen, hockey doesn't conform to you, Dell. You conform to hockey. Okay.
Like a MacBook. I got you.
So, hey, let's dive into some Clergy Cliff Notes. Hey, Andrew.
Yeah, guys. Cliff Notes. Clergy Cliff Notes. I don't remember what I sang last week, but there's stuff we think you should know. And we read about them on the internet.
All right, write down the lyrics for next week.
Are we really doing this?
I love it. Andrew, read us your Clergy Cliff Note.
So my Clergy Cliff Note is coming to us from Carrie Nieuwhof. I like Carrie Nieuwhof quite a bit. Of course, I have just lost the file. There we go.
Pope of the Great White North.
I lost it again.
Go back. Hang on. I'm teaching Andrew the internet. Go back. Hit the X when it said, "Do you want to learn more?" Hit no. He doesn't understand pop-ups and advertisements. He'll get there.
Yes, I would like to learn more.
I'm new to this. So last week, Carrie Nieuwhof had a post called "The Church Has Left the Building: 5 Truths About the Future Church Attendance and Commitment." And so the 5 main points were... this isn't really new. People were already attending less pre-COVID. The second point being engagement will become the new church attendance because attendance was never the goal. The third point was churches that equip Christians will eclipse churches that gather them.
Ooh.
Your online attendance will outpace your in-person attendance. And on-demand access will be more important than live streaming. So before we dive into the individual points, my thought going into this was, as much as I like what Carrie has to say and write, this is a blog post. Blogs are kind of predicated on getting clicks. And so each and every week, maybe a couple times a week, he has something that comes across as this bold prophetic statement that, can't possibly be wrong. And it's not a scientific research paper. This is a blog post, and he's usually fairly accurate, but this is not something that is being checked by fact checkers. Or there's no Pew research going into this. But with all that said, I think there's some pretty interesting points. The first one just being that this isn't new. Church attendance was dropping. One of the things that we've been reading for the past several months is that the pandemic is not changing anything. It's just accelerating what was already happening.
Wow.
And I think, looking at the families that have been around or haven't been around, you could see maybe, and I don't know what your church is like, but the people that were likely to maybe disappear for a few weeks at a time are the ones that are now disappearing for a few months at a time. Mm-hmm. So this is just kind of accelerating what was already happening. The second point was that the engagement will be more important than attendance. I thought that was really kind of interesting because, what's the phrase that every big church has used for the past 20 years? we count people because people count and people matter to God, something to that effect.
Yep.
Like, we're not all about numbers, but each number represents a person. Therefore, we're going to be all about numbers. And he's saying, we shouldn't be focusing on attendance. We should be focusing on engagement, to which I say yes, but, and I pastor a church that's maybe 70 people. You're not going to get engagement if you don't have people there to be engaged. So that has to be considered as well. I loved this, that churches that equip Christians will eclipse churches that gather them. So what should we be focusing on? Equipping people. I mean, as pastors, isn't our job to equip the saints to do the work of ministry, not just to gather them to come hear us talk? I thought that was interesting. The online attendance will outpace your in-person. I think that's the one that's going to be the easiest to be like, I don't think so. I don't think we're quite there as a culture, at least where we are as a church. We've been about 60-40-ish during this season, but everybody that is watching online for the most part says, they're looking forward to the day when they are coming back. I don't think there's a day coming where the online growth will really outpace the in-person growth. But I did find this compelling. The reason that I put this article in here was the point 5, on-demand access will become more important than live streaming.
Yeah, this is the one that intrigued me the most.
Yeah, and the argument was, we kind of operate church, especially during this live stream age, like it's TV in the 80s is what he says. So, if you don't tune in, you're going to miss it, when really we're living in the Netflix or YouTube age, and premium content that you can get whenever you want is going to beat out mediocre content that you have to tune in at a very specific time to get. And I think all of our churches, we're live streaming or we're debuting something at a specific time, but most of the content is still available for forever. Afterwards, it's on your site or it's on your social media in perpetuity. But this idea that let's really go all out and create something that is not just supposed to be watched at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, but something that could be watched, at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday or whenever it is that you're tuning in. And that will get you way more impact with your people than expecting them to tune in right whenever your regular services are.
But I just struggle because I hear what you're saying. And I agree. I love the idea of on-demand access, but I'm not a content creator. I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
I don't run a multi-billion-dollar company like Netflix. I pastor a church of 200 people. So I get that on-demand access sounds amazing, but am I going to have to hire a guy who can figure that out? Because I'm not that guy.
I think a lot of, what you're seeing is the churches, and Frank, you guys have done a really good job of this, but, kind of breaking down the sermon content for little social media nuggets here and there, or, here's a 3-minute portion of the sermon. And if you want to check out the rest of it, swipe up, or there's a link in the bio for the rest of the sermon. I think that is what is super compelling. And I don't know that anybody is tuning in
for the whole thing.
And I don't know what everybody's CCLI license or whatever license you use. Eventually someone's going to have to start cracking down, because broadcasting music live is one thing, but keeping the video of the live music on your website for forever is a different thing than broadcasting the music in a live stream. So eventually it's going to be, maybe it should say the sermon content should become on demand more so than the rest of the service elements.
That's fair. And I think what you were talking about, the small clips, I've heard Joe Rogan refer to those as entrance ramps. He'll post these small clips. It's like, it's just really an entrance ramp, almost like a flyer for your church. Oh man, that really spoke to me. My gut reaction when I first saw you send us this link was the whole idea of your online attendance outpacing your in-person attendance. I'm thinking, well, maybe so, but if you do well at the number 3, then maybe not, because number 3 was, listen, we need to be equipping our Christians, and right now our culture is trying to redefine what does it mean to be together. I think that's the big question that we are running into as Christians. What is togetherness? I mean, we've gone through these big hurdles in our faith, like who should have the scriptures, right? And we determined that should be in the vernacular of the average person. And now we're having to go as, what does it mean to be together? And the thing that I'll just level with you as a pastor, I'm 34 now. I'm struggling with the newer concept in the younger generation that together means I'm sitting at home in my internet in my underwear on TikTok, and I'm with you on TikTok. I'm wondering, like, how hard do we put that stake in the ground that it means physically? Because I'm a physically together kind of person. You know, like when we take communion, it is the saints together declaring together collectively, this is the gospel, the object lesson of it. You know, if I just take it in my home, like, is that together? And I think when we lean all the way in and say, well, no, it's just about reaching them online and getting more engagement there. Like, are we in essence saying, okay, then let's leave the back door open?
I mean, I feel like when I have talked to my people during COVID, so many of them who have been like, I want to be back in church. Like, I want to be around other people. And I'm not talking about just like an older generation. I'm talking about like people my age, people younger than me. And so I think there's so many people who are just like, the lack of physical community is something that people are hungry for. And so I feel like this article is a little bit of like the sky is falling, in the sense that like it's kind of predicting that our online attendance will outpace your in-person attendance. I think that only means in the confines of your reach can now expand outside of like your zip code. You know what I'm saying? So like, I know for our church, like our stream is reaching people in other states and I think some other countries, which have been great. But like, our church is now processing, well, what does it look like to disciple them when they don't attend our actual physical locations? And that's a conversation I think should be had. But I feel like it's naive to think that like because of 6 months, 7 months of COVID, people are going to be like, I only want to stay at home. I never want to be in person. I think there's people who may want that because of, you know, fear.
They wanted that before COVID, though. People that are introverted like that, they were that way before COVID happened.
Well, and maybe you're a nurse, and so you don't get Sunday mornings off, or maybe you're the cart girl at a golf course, and Sunday mornings when you're going to make the most money, and you've got someone that you got to provide for. So there's all of that as well. But I remember, what was this, like a year and a half ago, when Judah Smith launched the church home. You know, hey, we're gonna.
And people thought he was crazy, and
people thought he was people thought he was a heretic. You know, how dare this person suggest that church can happen at home from my phone? But then we're also supposed to forsake not the assembling together, and so there's.
And I think that's where we're at. What does it mean to be together? And there are people who would answer that if we're all tuned into the same stream in a chat room together, that we're together.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we have this conversation with maybe not just other pastors, but with our church members, and not make them feel guilty if they miss a Sunday or if they do choose to worship online? And I sent this to a couple of you guys just to hear your feedback, but I had a church in my area post something like this. And I thought, man, if I posted that, I'd probably take a lot of heat. And the post said, just like you can't raise a child through FaceTime calls or maintain a marriage over Zoom, a Christian cannot survive on internet church. And I'm like, that's a bold statement for a church to put out right now. What I don't know. Where do you guys land on that?
I mean, I wouldn't. I think that particular post is too far. I wouldn't post it, especially in the environment we're in. You know, the principle of being providentially hindered comes into play here, where, you know, I mean, I think we have to view. We're starting to get to the point where the difficult thing to discern is what folks in our church are providentially hindered from something legitimate, like if I come to the in-person gathering, I could potentially expose myself, and then I won't be able to see my dad, who is 88 years old in a nursing home, and I don't know how much time I have left with him. Okay. I'm not sure that that's, you know, something where I can say, well, that's not a legitimate reason. This is what's so hard about being a pastor right now. We're trying to like tell people what's a legitimate reason to not be at church and what's not. And like, I wasn't prepared to do that. So I think that's, you know, that everybody for a while was providentially hindered. I think you could make the case that even particular local mandates, you know, that we're seeing in different parts of the country make it so that you're providentially hindered. You know, it's against the law for you to gather, or against the mandate at least. And so that's where it becomes difficult to discern you know, in one particular case of this person who hasn't been here for a month. Like so there's a guy in my church. He's not from here. He's somebody from another country. And there are cultural things that are going on with him that make him take COVID way differently than people who live here. So he hasn't been to church. We've been meeting in person outdoors since like June. He came to one meeting, a prayer meeting we had outdoors like in May, and he showed up late, which is also kind of a cultural thing. And he, the rest of us who had been at the meeting had worn masks during the meeting. And then when most people left, there was about 5 of us left, and we all sat on my back deck, pretty far distanced, and we didn't have our masks on. So when this guy rolled up 45 minutes late and the prayer meeting was kind of already done, he came and joined us and sat on the deck with us, but he still had his mask on, but then I haven't seen him since. And so my impression is that made him really uncomfortable that we were sitting, together out, and this was back in May when, things were what they were. So, but every time I talk to him on the phone, he's like, yeah, I'm listening to every sermon. He's, from what I can tell, he's still giving online. He's still very engaged in the life of our church, but he's not coming to the in-person, services. So I don't know that there is a way for me to tell him, hey, I'd love to see you without it coming across like guilt. And so for now, I'm just kind of, it's just prayer. I mean, I'm just depending on the Lord to kind of move.
We're leaning into this in November. I'm on a preaching team at church, and pastors asked us to write the whole series for that. And being how it's post everything coming up and coming to the end of the year, we decided we're going to really lean into the assurance of faith. So we're just going to do exposition of Hebrews 10. And the hard part is, if you're going to do a straight exposition in Hebrews 10, it says you should not forsake the assembling together. And to be honest, when we lean into that wasn't why, but it's there. And so today at 3:30 here, we're having our team sermon writing meeting, and we're going to fight for what does that mean to how we handle that verse. Because we've seen pastors say, see you wicked people living in sin, not gathering, but then you've seen other people just ignoring it. What I'm going to submit, I've put some thought into it, and I've talked to some other pastors I know, is, listen, Scripture does say that. And I think the best pastoral advice that I can give to someone who's going through what does it mean to come back to church is this: I'm not going to answer that question for you. Should you or should you not come? That's your body. That's yourself. But what I'm going to encourage you is this: when are you coming? You need to start that conversation, the conversation that says, hey, listen, when numbers get here, or when this thing happens, like as a family, we need to start having the conversation. Because I don't know about you, but in our congregation, the people who aren't coming back, I've been asking them, so, I'm not telling you need to come back, but have you thought about like what needs to happen for you to come back? And they're like, well, we really don't know. I was like, well, maybe that's what Hebrew 10 is for you. You really need to sit down and start saying, what needs to happen? And specifically, I've been going to some of the men because, I said, listen, this is a great opportunity for you to lead in your families. So, and that's the encouragement we're going to handle it, Tim, because Hebrews 10 goes hard enough that I don't really need to bust them over that, because there's some other stuff. But just encourage them to begin having that conversation, because I do think pastorally we are held accountable for that.
So the question then for you is not if they're coming back, but when are they coming back?
When?
You're saying.
And are you having that conversation that will lead to that?
Do you guys, is this too bold of a statement to say that like there will be a time, I'm guessing within the next year or so, that like COVID is going to dissipate to the sense that like whether through vaccines or herd immunity, like there will be a time where the mask won't be an issue. We will be able to gather. That's not too bold to say, right? Like we're not too like thinking this is going to be a new normal
for most
forever.
people. There's going to be some people who I think are just stuck in this.
Guys, we're in phase 3 in Florida, if you haven't heard. So we're practically there now.
Florida's been in phase 3 since February.
I said to some of my elders and leaders here, I said, listen, the decisions that are difficult for us now, do we meet inside, outside? Those are just going to get harder before they get better when mandates get lifted. Right now, there's a sense in which it's a lot easier, because it's like, well, Baltimore County says we have to wear masks inside. Yep. So it's really not a discussion. But when they say that we don't have to, then what are we as a church doing? Because now you're getting into stewardship and shepherding, and it just is going to get harder.
So I think the question that like I want to answer and maybe this is not a question for today and for another show, is what are we doing thinking in the next year, maybe year and a half of like, let's say vaccine comes out later this year, and let's say some, if not most of the country takes it or whatever, however that works out. I don't know. Obviously there's people who won't take the vaccine, right? And then like COVID numbers decrease to the point where it's not even worth talking about. What is your plan in terms of saying, okay, we're at a place where there's no more restrictions and we feel comfortable with meeting? What is your plan on getting people to come to church? And then on top of that, what are you going to do with all this new infrastructure that you've created to reach people online? And for me, like one thing I thought was really cool is there's a couple of churches in California, and I think there's churches across the country doing this, but I think I saw Mariners do this. They had, because of COVID, you know, most of our Easter services were 100% online and all that kind of stuff. So they had a second Easter. And I don't know if that's a little blasphemous, but like they had a second Easter where basically they had like an Easter service on their lawn at their church to gather people together. And for me, I'm thinking through of like, what are those creative, like the same energy and creativity I had to reach people online? Like what's the creativity I'm going to have like in June of next year or September of next year when I think that's when things are going to be almost back to normal, that I'm going to be able to say, how are we going to get people back to church? How are we going to reach the new people that we've been drawing? Because I don't know about you guys, but because of online streaming, there's multiple church hoppers that have been checking out my church. And now they're in online small groups. And I'm hearing like, this person's from this church, this person's from that church, and they're thinking about coming. Like, what are you going to do in the next few months as COVID takes a downward turn to say we're going to change and pivot the way we do church? Or are you just kind of living in the moment? That's the thing I'm thinking about is like, we know what we're doing right now. What am I doing in March of next year? You know?
First of all, I claim that prophetic word that you just uttered, that it will go away. Yes.
Name it and claim it.
I think for us, one of the things, so number 5 in this list, that on demand will eclipse the live stream option. Something I think we talked about this before, but trying to just get creative with like how we do a live stream. Right now, one of the things I do is I clip our live stream after the fact so that it's just the sermon. I haven't gotten to the point where I've clipped it into like, bite-sized things. Part of it for me is, we're a very small church. I'm the only staff member, so it's just me doing it. So I need to find some people in my church to help me do that. Number one, I've got a couple younger guys in my church who I think could do it, who are into like streaming and stuff. But the other thing we're thinking about is like, so what are the things that can happen in an in-person gathering that really can't happen online? And is there a way to shape our online live stream after the fact that people can and probably should be coming to the in-person gathering? Are there ways to shape our live stream so that it sort of, the live stream is like an on-ramp to the full-on experience of being there in person? Of course, the community part of it, I would argue, yes, you can be present with one another in a way online, but not in the same way as you can in person. And I think the in-person way is a fuller experience. But I think that there are things like communion. There are things like testimonies that happen in the room that I don't think are reproducible online. And so we're talking about like, what would it look like to shape our service in such a way that there are segments of it that we stream and segments of it that we don't. And we make it like hey, this is a family experience that you can't do online. And so we've talked about switching from doing like a typical live stream on Facebook or YouTube Live to doing the live stream part like on Zoom and having like a screen in the room where we can see them in the room with us. But then only zooming that part that's like the teaching and maybe the prayer time and stuff and maybe the singing. And then the other stuff that's more like intimate, like communion, would not be streamed. That's something that actually kind of goes back to like the ancient church, closing off communion time to only the members. So there's a sense in which you're almost doing like an ancient future type of thing there. So that's kind of how we're thinking through it. How we encourage people to come once this is over. I mean, for me, that's just going to be one-on-one conversations with people where it's like, hey, and I think this goes to asking questions now. Like, Del, I think what you said was great. Like, hey, what are the standards for your family going forward? Because I do think being intentional about it is a big deal. My family and I are right now talking about eating indoors. We haven't eaten in a restaurant indoors. And I talked to my wife on yesterday afternoon, like, hey, is it time for us to start thinking about it? The numbers are here. This is what it means. Obviously we don't need to eat indoors, but we're having that conversation. Why wouldn't we have those conversations about church as well?
Yeah. One of the things I'm doing at a small level, because I think where Jeff's at is very important. We have to be having an intentional conversation about everything that goes online and whether it should. Because there's some things we should bring to the people, and there's some things that the people should be here if they're going to be a part of it. One of the things I'm doing outside of the worship experience or gathering to help with the recovery is I'm developing relationships with my local pastors as best as I can. I take about one day every 2 weeks and I dedicate that day to visiting pastors in my community because of what Frank said. The church hopping is going to be nasty. And just, I had a friend, he showed up at our church and I know where he worships and I know his pastor. His pastor is a friend of mine. So I reached out to his pastor and I was like, hey, he's here. What about this? And actually his pastor told me, hey, I told him to go to your church because he told me where his family was, and with the restrictions that y'all have alleviated, I actually think that it would be better if his family was at your church. Cool. I just want to make sure that their discipleship is not being overlooked or handed over or running from something or to something. And meanwhile, I shared with you guys in the podcast last week about how someone in a very high leadership position at my congregation was church shopping and just left without saying anything. After that podcast we did, the pastor from that church rolled into my office and was like, hey, so we know this guy and he was a big deal. Can you tell us what happened? And I was like, we can. And he was actually able to be like, whoa, thank you for the breaks, because we didn't know. And there was like no ill talking. It was just like, here's the facts. But if we would not have had the relationship, he would not have felt comfortable to walk into my office. And I would not have felt comfortable to walk into there. So I think one of the best things we can do as local pastors is to be in community with the other pastors. So that way, when the chips start falling as they may, we can, if anything, make sure our people are being discipled and held accountable.
Awesome. Hey, Jeff, let's transition to our next Clergy Cliff Note that you brought to us today.
So a few days ago, I guess it was on like September 17th, I can see, there was a post in the Practically Pastoring Facebook group, which if you're listening to this and you're not in the group, get on that.
Shame on you.
Also follow on Instagram and YouTube as well, because stuff goes on there. But there was a post, and this will tie into our main conversation later, from a guy that actually Frank and I went to school with. And he basically said, hey, here's a situation that happened. I was let go unexpectedly. I didn't have a warning. Some hurtful things were said. And he has a young baby, a 2-year-old daughter, and a pregnant wife. And so they're moving in with parents. And so he asked a few questions. When you get burned, hurt, just blindsided, let go by a church, and I would say when you get hurt by a church, if you're in ministry, it's going to happen. When you get hurt by a church, how do you deal with it? How do you recover from it? How do you move on? And then how do you get, he's asking, how do you get past the thought of just leaving ministry? And I've grappled with that. Maybe I can share a little bit of that here, but, and then how do you, get over the feelings towards people that hurt you, for him that he's looked up to for a long time? And how do you help your family deal with this? 'Cause they're going to be hurt as well. So I will give you just a brief version of my story and how I, hopefully overcame it. For 2 years in Orlando, I was part of a staff of a church that was going to be an interim position. When we came on staff, we were told, yeah, we know on paper it's interim, but we want you here long term. And so in my youthful zeal, I guess I kind of just went with that and thought, this is what it is. And for the first year, it was pretty good. I was a multi-staff. I was one of the associate pastors. In year 2, the person that was playing the role of lead pastor really hadn't ever been a lead pastor before. He had been president of a Christian institution, and so he kind of approached it as a CEO model, and that didn't work with kind of the ethos of the church. And so the second year was pretty rough, and we had a lot of like 8-hour long elder meetings on Saturdays and just crazy dysfunctional stuff. And because at that point, the agreement was a 2-year interim thing that really started to be hammered on. And so we were at the end of that pretty disillusioned because we had one picture going in and that actually wasn't what happened. And so for me, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, a lot of bitterness crept in there. I was pretty bitter for a long time, and honestly, time helped a lot. But then there was just a lot of just prayer and just, kind of dealing with the selfishness that was going on inside of me, and just having to learn to forgive in a way that I really probably hadn't learned to forgive up to that point. And the reality is I wasn't a perfect pastor either. I mean, it's not like I did everything perfectly right and they just let me go out of nowhere. That's not what happened. Was I hurt by the church? Absolutely. Was my wife hurt by the church? Absolutely. But part of it is just understanding the expectation that church is full of people, just like you, who make bad decisions and who do things that they shouldn't do. And that's just honestly part of being in ministry. I don't know a pastor who's in ministry today who doesn't have a story like this, or some crazy story of something. And so I just think, young guys listening, young women listening, if you're just getting into ministry, you need to change your expectations that there's going to be some hurt that's going to happen by a church and that the Lord will use it if you will let him. Or you can make the choice to not, let him use it fully and get out of ministry. And that may be the right thing for you. And we've talked about that in the past. If you start being the problem and it's you against everybody at the church, it might be time for you to move on. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say other than that this is hard. And this is why older people in ministry tell you ministry is hard. It just is. Yeah,
Jeff, that's really good. I think what's so interesting about it happening today versus it happening 10 or 15 years ago. Okay, I'll say this. What's great about it happening today is you might actually have a network of people to turn to. So I had this conversation with my dad, who was in ministry for 20 years, about the difference of connecting with other pastors. Because when he was in ministry in the late 80s, early 90s, it was a territorial thing. You did not connect with other pastors. That you didn't want anybody going to their church. You didn't want to be seen with them. So, and it's just so different because Andrew and I, we hang out every single week. We hang out every single week now. We have our practically pastoring Facebook group, where we have guys and girls we can talk to and relate to. So my big thing for church hurt now is don't go through the church hurt alone, because chances are someone in your network has also gone through that church hurt too.
I was let go from my first ministry job, and it was, the church was going through a lot of stuff. I was told that I was not being fired. I was being freed to pursue seminary full time in the middle of February, because that's when semesters begin. Yeah. And so, it was a thing where 13 out of like 18 full-time employees at this church were all freed to pursue these other things. And then we all looked around like, oh, wow. Okay. I see what they were doing now. And it took time to get over the hurt of that. And then 5-ish years later, I was on staff at a church while I was finishing seminary, and with kind of the promise of, here's what this position is going to look like when you finish seminary, and we've got this all made for you. And then a new family pastor was hired and brought in 6 months before that transition happened, and he and I just did not click. And he made it kind of made abundantly clear that I was not in his long-term plans. And despite my relationship with the executive pastor, and despite my relationship with the senior pastor, he and I just weren't going to become besties. And so we kind of felt like it was God leading us to move from Texas back home. And in both of those situations that, I kind of felt betrayed and felt like, this isn't fair. Why is this happening? God blessed me and my wife, and then the second time, our growing family so much. I don't know that I would have had the courage to pursue seminary full time when I did if it was not for that. And if I didn't pursue seminary full time when I did, I think eventually the kids would have started showing up. Financially, it wouldn't have been possible. And I don't think that part of my life would have happened. And then when we moved back home to Florida, a little bit with our tail between our legs, I didn't envision that the next chapter of ministry would look like it did either. And I think whenever God moves you from one situation to another, you can either kind of dig your heels in and be bitter and say, you know, oh shucks, woe is me, this isn't fair. Or you can be like, oh, all right, God, what is it that you have for me next? And the two difficult transitions that I went through in ministry, both of them just, you know, months later, I could look back and be like, holy cow, God, this was something that you were delivering me from. You know, the first church went through a season of upheaval and it was all kinds of mess. The second one, I literally got a call from that boss that I didn't get along with, maybe 3 weeks after I'd moved back to Tampa. And the call went something like, you know, I was told to ask if you would be willing to come back because somebody else had resigned. And so, you know, now
told to ask.
Exactly. I'm like, so you're not asking me if I'm willing to come back. Wow. You were told to ask me if I'm willing to come back.
I feel that.
And it was just like the Holy Spirit just kind of like, you know, giggling in my ear saying like, see, like I've got you. Yeah. This is the path that I have you on. And it's not always the easiest path. But if we didn't deal with resistance, we would probably stay on the same path that we're on for forever. We're creatures of habit. We like comfort. And sometimes God is trying to move us out of our comfort zone. And sometimes getting moved out of your comfort zone sucks. There's no way around it. And sometimes you're not going to have the courage or the fortitude or whatever it may be to make that leap on your own. And so God is going to give you a little push.
Yeah. Every time I think about these transitions or these wounds that you receive from people, two things really come to my mind. We must remember the nature of man and the character of God, you know, and because I know a lot of times in these churches, the people who've hurt me are people who I love. I think it was either R.C. Sproul or Alistair Begg. They said it on a Ligonier conference. They said, you know, the best of men are men at best. And I think that's one of the things I have to keep reminding myself is like everyone who I interact with, even the men I put on pedestals, they're still men. You know, they're not perfect. And sometimes we carry the burden of some of their decision making. Right. And it's in that where I really just run straight to the character of God. And basically what you guys have been weaving the last 5 minutes is looking and leaning upon his sovereignty, knowing that he is going to guide you, and that nothing happens to us that doesn't first pass through his hands, even though it, at that moment it seems very painful and it seems very hard. I'll be willing to bet everyone on in this podcast today could say you in part are where you are, and it wouldn't have happened if there wasn't some wound or some kind of guidance. And I will say even this, there might have been some evil in it. I mean, we look at scripture. You know, Joseph sold into slavery, and what's this big kind of thing he comes to? What you meant for evil, God meant for good. So if you're someone right now and you're going through something, I would just encourage you to lean into his goodness and his plan, even if you don't understand it, and know that like if you called according to his purpose, he's working all things out for that good.
I would add one thing to what Del was saying, and it's like, yes, there might have been evil in it, but it's also really easy to look and be like, you know, what did I do? But sometimes you need to really look and be like, no, seriously, like what did I do? Yeah. Where did I fall short? Because, you know, in both of the situations that I described, one of them, you know, I was super immature and probably should have never gotten the job to begin with. And there was a whole lot of growing up that needed to happen. Mm-hmm. And the other one was, you know, when someone, just because you've been somewhere longer than somebody else doesn't mean that you don't need to treat them like they're the boss when they're the boss. And so in both of those situations, whereas to say, you know, I was let go for cause, that wasn't the case. It's not like, you know, you hear stories of pastors getting fired for all kinds of crazy stuff. And it wasn't anything like that. But in both situations, I could look back and be like, oh, here's what I could have done differently. Here's how I could have responded to people differently. And here's how I can learn from that moving forward. And then still 6 months later, in both of those situations, it was like, thank you, God, for kind of moving me on to the next phase of my life. But you can still learn from what you could have done better, even if leaving was the right thing to do.
Sure.
Can I push on that a little bit? I think like we should I'm like push it further down your direction in the same way. Like I think even if you feel like it wasn't your fault, if you felt like there's nothing you can learn, then it probably was your fault.
Boom.
you know, like, cause there should always be something we learn when we go through any kind of transition in life. Cause none of us are perfect administrators of grace, you know?
I mean, I was going to make a joke after hearing Delmar's part about saying something about Jeremiah 29:11 and being like, but the plans God has for me. But then I was like, you guys are being serious. I don't want to mess with the mood here. But I do agree. Like every time I've been hurt by people, I was rereading the post he made, and he talks about like, how do you handle people who have hurt you that you look up to and respect and stuff like that. And like, I everyone said everything. It's like, people are sinful, people misjudge and stuff like that. I think the biggest thing that I've learned over however many years of experience I've had is that when I have church hurt, it's very okay in that moment to feel the pain of the hurt and like process all that kind of stuff. But like, Delmar, you kind of like, I think you're being serious. It's like, if you can't find something you can learn from this, then like, you're probably the dummy in this situation, because like most often than not, what I've learned, even the parts where it was 100% their fault and I did nothing wrong, is it taught me something about how to interact or what to look for when I'm in a position where I'm a subordinate or I'm interacting with people. I learned how to read people better because of these situations where like I walked into that job naive, I came out of that job with a little more experience. And so now that I can use that hurt, that pain that I just went through, as now a tool in my toolbox of now how to interact with certain people or how to process certain conversations. And so I think whether that's through therapy, whether that's through other pastors coaching you and processing things with you, or whether that's really, really good self-awareness, I think that's super important. The one thing that we haven't talked about, I think is super important, and I feel this a lot, and I don't know if you guys have experienced this, is the people who are oftentimes most affected by your church hurt is actually your family, like your spouse. Like, and one thing that like I have wrestled with this conversation in my mind, and me and my wife have had this discussion multiple times, is how much do I share with her of what's going on? And like, what do I share with her without worrying her? And what do I share with her that I feel like is necessary for her to know for the sake of our marriage and stuff like that? Because at the end of the day, like there are sometimes I'm dealing with church hurt that has nothing to do with her and ultimately would not affect her. But if I share it with her, it's ultimately going to affect her and her feelings towards those other people, especially if there's other staff members that you're supposed to be cordial with. And so, I think one day we should have a whole episode of just like spouses and families and how we like involve them in our ministry or don't involve them, because I think there's a whole episode that we could talk about there.
Frank, what if we had a spouse takeover? What if our spouses came on the show?
Whoa.
Crazy?
Would you
got crazy?
Be pretty
And
wild.
we all green screened, and so they weren't in the exact
Are we
space.
all nominating our wives to do something they haven't agreed to?
People
That's
would have
great
to
content.
People would have to guess who was whose spouse. They couldn't use our name.
That'd be funny.
That'd be super fun.
If all of our spouses are like in it, I'm sure. I think Corey would be into it. I have to ask her.
I think Amy'd be into it.
But like we can't be in the show. It's 100% them.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine the hour and a half or 2 hours of pacing we would do?
We would not be able to do that.
And they get to edit and post it before we.
My wife does not know how to use Premiere Pro, Premiere, whatever it's called. Premiere Pro. I don't know
Procreator? What are you talking
Procreate.
about?
Whoa.
Premiere Pro.
What?
I'm so nervous about this episode that like I forgot the name of Premiere Pro.
You're nervous about a theory that hasn't even. All right, I'm gonna add two things on the end of this discussion.
All right.
Number one, I would just say for those of you who are in a situation where you're starting to feel embattled and you feel like, ooh, maybe I'm gonna get fired and it's not fair and all that. I would just say, remember, you cannot force a church to like want you. You cannot force a leadership team to want you to have it on it. And that may hurt. And I know that it hurts, but you can't force people to want you to lead them. You just can't. And so if they're to the point where they're saying, we don't want you to lead us, take that as a grace of God that, like we've all basically said, there's probably another opportunity down the road, and don't do something stupid at the end that will burn your future. Fighting for something that actually isn't even an option, because there's a point at which you get to a place in a church where there really is not a future for you there. And it's really hard. And I think, there can be times when that can flip and you can, I'm not saying there's no redemption, but I'm just saying if it's like I've been let go, don't do something that will then follow you to the next place and be part of your sort of, your legacy, so to speak. And then the last thing, and this goes with what Frank just was talking about with the wife episode. The last thing he asked is like, what do you do to help your family and try to be strong for them? And my opinion on the strong for them thing is you need to just be free of that lie. Like, I don't think it's your job to be strong for the way you're strong for your family is to be vulnerable with your family. Because I just think God's power is made perfect in weakness. And I think there can be times when the attempt to be strong for your spouse is really about you not wanting to let your spouse all the way into your pain. And I just think that's an unhealthy place to be. So that's my opinion on it. I may be, rebuked by one of you, but that's what I think about that. So I would just say, like, don't be in the bondage of I have to be strong for them so I can't actually process this with my spouse who you've made a covenant with for forever.
That's good. That's good. Hey, I want to transition into our final segment. The main topic of today is it's a little lighter. I feel like it's a little lighter topic than everything.
But kind of related to what we just talked about.
Yeah. Kind of related. Pastor side hustles, right? Like sometimes it comes out of necessity. Sometimes it comes out of a hobby. There's a bunch of different reasons why we do side hustles. So I can tell you right now, Jeff and I had a side hustle together. We've talked about it before. We had a t-shirt printing company.
Okay, but let's be straight. It was a side hobby because it didn't pay us anything.
But we shipped internationally.
We hustled though. We hustled.
We hustled, and yeah, I mean, it was a thing we did. But like, I mean, we were printing banners and doing other stuff, a lot of design work, which I think it tends to be, when you are a solo pastor trying to just grind your way in ministry and you have to do all the jobs in your church, it seems like the creative stuff like printing and designing tends to kind of boil to the top because it's just something we have to do it all. We have to have Adobe for our work. Let me also make a couple bucks on the side while I do it, right? And so it seems like that seems to be the situation. But I know guys, I think of my buddy Anthony who did mechanic work for people, and made money like that. So I guess let me ask this, what are some side hustles you guys have done? And then we'll ask the reason why.
My favorite side hustle that I do is do videography. I got a wedding the 10th and I got another wedding the first week of December. I shoot events for Sumter, which is the city I live in. I shoot one in Lake City, which is about 20 minutes away. I started it because I love videography. I was doing it when I was a student pastor because my church had like not many people in it. And I was like, if you're not big, look big. So I went and got a camera and started filming. And I realized, man, I really like this. And then my brother, he does this professionally. He shoots conferences. He travels America shooting videos. So I kind of worked out a deal with him. Hey, I'll be your second shooter in a wedding for a season if you give me this gear. So he gets a tax write-off and I get gear. And what it's turned in for me is a place to really have just some supplemental cash for like going on vacations and taking care of Christmas. But one of the coolest things that I've experienced by doing the side hustle in the same town that I'm in is I have interacted with so much more of the community that is just not churched. Like I shoot video for these people in our town who, quite honestly, they own a lot of the town. And so when I shoot for a lot of their events, I'm meeting people that never darken the doors of the churches around here because they're too busy. And so consequently, when I see people at TJ Maxx or Walmart or in the restaurant, they're, hey, Delmar, I don't know if they know me because I'm a pastor or because I'm a videographer. And I actually kind of like how my side hustle in some ways has helped out just me being able to wrap my arms around this community. But yeah.
So the side hustle conversation for Andrew and I goes back quite a few years. It's one of the reasons that we're still friends today.
And a friend's a friend forever.
He always breaks out into song when we.
If you make money on the side with them,
and invest it into a good Roth IRA. I'm sorry.
Hey, the why is very simple. I have 5 kids. Andrew has 4 kids. We needed a way to, like you said, Del, pay for Christmas. Pay for a vacation every now and then. So the side hustle became very, very important for my family income early on. Andrew and I, we've written for DYM as a side hustle. Me personally, I work now on the side for a video production company, and we primarily, as of late, have been Zooming and live streaming funerals for people all over the country, which has been a really cool industry. And it's been booming. So we have a great relationship with some area funeral homes.
As long as people are dying, Tim is making money.
Oh
and these funeral homes don't know how to do these things. And we know how to live broadcast services. So it's something we know how to do.
Listen, I'm going to be making some phone calls after we get off of here.
I watched a funeral broadcast from a funeral home from someone that I knew, and it was the worst thing. And knowing the little bit of the funeral industry that I know, I'm like, they probably charged this family $1,000 to have a camera set up in the back of the room. And
I guarantee you it was more than that, but yes. Yeah. So I do a little bit of that with video production. My brother is a filmmaker. So whenever he makes a film, I do my best to get on set. And as long as I have one speaking role, I get to make the actor's minimum, which is not so terrible. And I also teach Bible at my kids' school one Friday a month, and I'm a substitute as well for the same school. So multiple revenue streams has been a part of my life for a while now. When I got brought on as lead pastor at my church, I made sure they knew that I do dabble in multiple revenue streams, but it will never interfere or have any sort of major impact on my life as a pastor.
You know, to be fair, interject. I think that it would do well for churches to realize sometimes pastors have side hustle because I need an outlet. Like one of the things I hate that I don't get to do anymore is I don't get to create like I used to. And having that is like the best way for me just to get it out my system. Like sometimes it's not even about the money sometimes. Yeah. It's almost therapeutic in its own self.
Well, it's always about the money for me because I'm a big fan. So like Tim and I, we did a whole lot of download youth ministry work together for years and years. It's slowed down in our roles as senior pastors, but that's probably been the most consistent side hustle that I ever got to be a part of. Another one that, I know there's philosophical differences with everybody, but there was a season that I would do, 2 or 3 weddings a month for people I didn't know. There's a service called Thumbtack that is always looking for people to do weddings. And in Florida, you have tourists constantly wanting to come down and get married at the beach or, wanting to get married somewhere. And the way that I look at it is you're never going to lead someone to Jesus by telling them that they're not good enough for you to marry them. And so my standard for marrying people that are members of my church is very different than if 2 people say, hey, we want to get married. Will you do it? I say, if I'm allowed to present the gospel however I want in your service, then you can have my signature on your piece of paper. And so, that was a season, when I was not preaching every Sunday morning, doing a couple weddings per Saturday was a neat extra side hustle that doesn't quite make as much sense for my family anymore. And with the kind of changing of the seasons coming into the senior ministry position here, as the download youth ministry royalties were not making as much as they were because Tim and I just we weren't pumping out resources the way that we used to. My wife started to teach for a company called VIP Kid, which kind of replaced that income for our family. And she was a teacher before we had 4 boys in 6 years. And so it kind of gave her the creative outlet of, being a teacher and contributing that way. And so she is up at 5 a.m. a couple days a week teaching English to little boys and girls in China via the FaceTime camera in her laptop. So VIP Kid, if you want a referral code, I will gladly give you my wife's because you need a bachelor's degree and any experience with children, and you can teach kids English. They do all the lesson plans and everything, but that's something that she has really enjoyed.
I mean, I know I did DYM as well, and I think at least for sure 4 of us. Jeff, did you do anything for like DYM or some other youth ministry company or something?
I wrote like one thing for youthmen.org, and that was it.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I think especially in youth ministry, it kind of lends itself to being very easy and accessible to write curriculum and be a part of it. And like, if you get into the world of like conference speaking, stuff like that, like it's all right. Like there's decent money to be made sometimes. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's definitely like exposure type of thing. But when you become a senior pastor or like a lead pastor, like those opportunities are seems more difficult because like, I mean, you're not going to put your money on Sermon Central and like make money off of it. You know what I'm saying? But it's definitely interesting. What I loved about DYM is there was definitely synergy, right? Like you're already creating stuff for your ministry. You just have to make sure it's edited in such a way, and then boom, you can make a very good passive income. But that kind of stuff doesn't really exist outside of that. I do have a question. You kind of hinted towards this, Tim. Is there ever a moment where you should feel guilty about doing a side hustle? Like is there ever, because like I sometimes wonder, like Delmar, your side hustle is very public, right? You're in the community, you're doing videos. Andrew, you're doing weddings to strangers. like do you ever feel like there's might be an elder or someone like looking at you and like, are we not paying you enough? Like, why are you doing this? Like, do you ever feel guilt about your side hustle?
I try to set some boundaries in my side hustle that keep me from crossing that line. For example, I'm never going to do a job for someone in town on behalf of the church and charge money. So one of the things, my side hustle, I train people in my church how to run cameras, and a new business comes to town and I want to shoot a highlight video to them. I will go shoot a highlight video to them for free and just give it to them as a gift from our church to them. I've had them try to come back and pay me. I was like, I can't. I'm doing this on behalf of the church. If we were talking about this on the side over here, but I really never blend the streams of revenue and my ministry.
Yeah, I think we do have to be a little bit careful here. So that's why I'm very vocal about my side hustles with my elders, with our church staff, and with a lot of our church people as well. It's been an issue in the past. Our previous lead pastor, he did have a job on the side, and it was seen somewhat negatively because people thought it was really taking away a lot of his time from focusing on the church. So I try to make sure and make it a point that I'm usually doing my side hustle work on my days off, or if it does coincide with a typical work day, I'll then replace that day off with a church work day.
I've got something for a buddy of mine has a side hustle that people know that he does, but they don't know how lucrative it is. And there are regular seasons where he will make more from his side hustle than he makes from his full-time ministry position.
So the ministry position is the side hustle in that case.
Well, he doesn't have the health benefits from the side hustle.
True.
But like the dollars and cents, it's a big whoa. And his struggle is that he does not want people in the church to know how lucrative the side hustle is. And so he and his family, when they tithe on that side hustle, they're sponsoring missionaries separately, missionaries that their church supports, that they're writing checks directly to that missionary or to that missions organization, so that it's not funneling through the church office, which I certainly get that there's other components in that as well, but to have the side hustle that is so successful that you don't want people to know.
That's the dream, right?
Yeah.
But that's definitely my advice for those who are considering a side hustle. What are you already good at? Where are you naturally gifted? Like in Dell's situation, he was already doing videos for student ministry. It made sense for him to get into the world of videography. And it was the same for me for video production. I just had connections with guys and they needed extra help there. And so it made sense for me to step into that role. So I would hope that you wouldn't try to go out and learn a whole new something, but what are you already good at that you can use, and maybe you'll actually enjoy doing your side hustle too.
Yeah, I would love, for 1 minute, I would love to hear, if you were skilled in something, what could be a good overlay for pastors? One thing I was actually thinking, I was telling this to Jeff before you guys all got on, is I wish Jeff had a PC so we could play video games with each other. And so we could start a Twitch. I want to start a Twitch channel. And I think, because I already play video games, it's already fun and relaxing to me. If I could just have some like some fun talking to someone else while playing it, and like have some sort of like passive revenue from Amazon for Twitch. Like I would love that. I mean, I have no idea how that world works, but what about you guys? Like, what are some like side hustles that maybe there's someone listening that could be like, oh, I never thought I could do that as a side hustle?
Well, I mean, something I've done in the past is like, other than the videography and the website building stuff that we've kind of already touched on, I've made a few like pieces of furniture for people. So a little bit of woodworking is always something fun. I'm kind of learning that I'm project oriented in terms of that stuff. So I like having some kind of project like on the side that I can do. So right now, because I live in an older parsonage, that side project is the house I live in. And so there's a long list of painting and fixing the backyard up and all kinds of stuff. But I've done a little tiny bit of woodworking on the side, building a few tables with benches. And it's pretty satisfying. I mean, you know, because they pay you to do it and it's not a huge income thing, but it's like vacation money, put it aside, whatever. Now, something that I've done here since I've been the pastor here, since I've been a senior pastor, I guess, is funerals for the people in the community, which has also been a little bit like what Andrew said, a little bit of an opportunity to connect with people. But funeral homes here occasionally call me and say, "Are you available to meet with this family?" And you know, it pays pretty well. Now you have on here, when should you not do a side hustle? And I think you shouldn't do a side hustle if you're planning to leave your church as a way to leave. Like that's not healthy. You should talk to somebody about like what your plans are, but like don't blindside a church with like, "Hey, by the way, I quit and I'm going to be doing this."
So you're saying that like bringing Cuban sandwiches to Milwaukee, I can't just do that as my plan to leave my church?
Listen, you have your own elders to deal with on that.
I have noticed this.
Frankie's food truck? That sounds awesome.
Frankie's food truck. That's funny.
Okay, listen, Cuban food truck is designed as a tank because Frank the Tank.
Dude, yes, I'm in.
Go with it.
I was going to say,
we want royalties now.
5%.
Okay, that's how that works.
I have noticed that a lot of pastors are also real estate agents. Have you noticed that there's like a lot of pastors who are also real estate?
I've never heard
a lot of pastors
the Lord's earth, man.
A lot of pastors that have had affairs are real estate agents.
Ouch.
Okay. Yikes. All right. Hey, moving on. Question of the week. Real quick, pumpkin spice foods and drinks. Are we about it? Are we against it? What saith the Practically Pastoring podcast crew?
Is this a debate?
The pumpkin spice life. Yeah, this
Thank
is not.
you,
this
Jeff.
is as much a debate as pineapple on pizza, of course.
Stop. You went somewhere where I was with you and then we were not together. Pumpkin spice pizza?
There's,
Okay, now
there's pumpkin spice Kraft macaroni and cheese that's out right now.
Oh, gosh.
It came in from Canada.
I pulled up an article of 15 things that are pumpkin spice that are really ridiculous.
Let's hear it.
Should I do it? Okay, here we go.
Yes,
Ready?
absolutely.
This is from Wide Open Eats, a site I've never heard of that I Googled. So, number 1, pumpkin spice almonds. Maybe. I could see that. Okay. Pumpkin pie spice Pringles.
Oh.
This could be. See, this is in the world of. This is in the world.
I'm with you, Frank.
This is in the world of dipping your French fries in a Wendy's Frosty. Like,
delicious.
Sounds gross at first, but then when you do it, you're like, actually, this is kind of good.
I get it. Yeah.
Okay. This is combining things that don't need to be combined. Pumpkin spice candy corn. First of all, candy corn is disgusting.
How dare you?
I
My boy loves that.
Okay,
love
so
candy corn.
To me, this just makes something that's already terrible even weirder and worse. You might as well say pumpkin pie spice olives. Disgusting. Like, why would you do it?
Ew, that's gross. Yeah.
Okay, this one's really gross. Pumpkin spice hummus. Why?
Oh, my wife would eat that.
Guys, no. Backtrack here. It actually tastes like pumpkin pie. We bought it last week.
What do you eat it on, though? Pumpkin pie? Just eat the pie.
No, like
or we did graham crackers.
We did the pita chips in there, and it was incredible.
Okay,
give it a shot. Give it a shot.
All right, maybe.
That's funny.
Okay, I don't think this is real, but maybe. It says KFC pumpkin and feta twister. It's like a pumpkin and feta chicken wrap.
Oh
gosh.
That's gross.
Why? Okay, pumpkin spice latte burger. This is apparently a real thing at a place called Umami. Why?
See, I
We have
can't
those in
do
Tampa.
pumpkin on meat. That's weird.
Listen,
That's like a blended worship service. It's not going to make anybody happy.
everybody's upset, man. Either hymns or modern worship. Like you're not doing both. Okay. Twinkies that are pumpkin spice. That sounds.
That sounds like
try
do
that.
that.
I would try that.
If I was going to eat a Twinkie, I could see that. Peeps, pumpkin spice latte Peeps.
I'm not
Again
a peep
with
guy.
the already gross. Why?
Yeah.
Toothpaste, pumpkin pie spice toothpaste.
Brushing your teeth with squash.
Oh, that was funny. You got me.
I can't get around that.
You got me. This one, I don't know what. Pumpkin spice soap on a rope. I mean, just let's move on. Okay, Frank, this is for you. Pumpkin spice beard oil. Maybe.
That could smell good, Frank. That could smell good.
It could, or it could smell horrible.
It's going to go either way.
It could smell good, or it could smell like the whipped cream that got on you a little bit hours later. That's kind of
That's so
that
bad.
went sour. That is the worst.
The fact we all know what that's like is telling.
Give us one more. Give us one more good one, Jeff.
Okay. Let me look at the list. Hold on. This one's kind of weird. Simply Beyond pumpkin spray on spice. So it's pumpkin spice in a can, kind of like spray on like cooking oil, but you just spray pumpkin spice on your food and eat it.
See, I thought it was like the bathroom spray that you keep on the back of the toilet.
No, it's like an aerosol can of like pumpkin spice flavoring that you just spray on top of things.
It's a basic white girl's spritz system.
It's a basic white girl spritzer is what it is.
I don't pumpkin spice anything. It does nothing for me.
Come on, the pumpkin cream cold brew is the greatest beverage ever invented at Starbucks.
It does sound good.
Pumpkin is one of those foods. It's kind of like stuffing where we've regulated it to like a certain time of the year, but like it's good year round.
I love stuffing all day, every day.
I know, but when I talk about stuffing, people are like, it's only for Thanksgiving. I'm like, I can eat this.
Okay, let's talk about breakfast foods. Why am I only allowed to eat eggs and bacon at breakfast? That's dumb.
That is an all-day
These
thing.
are the
amazing
real
all the time.
Biscuits every
These
meal.
are the real issues that we have to answer as a country.
I wasn't as much
absolutely.
into pumpkin spice life when I lived in Florida because it's still 1 billion degrees out in October.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I've moved somewhere that actually has seasons, and like today, the leaves are starting to turn orange, and like the weather's cooler. I'm in 100% for the pumpkin spice life.
Wow. I love it. Hey, well, I want to hear from you guys if you're about the pumpkin spice life. If you've had something interesting that's of a pumpkin spice derivative, I want to hear about it. Put it in the show note. Put it in the comments on Instagram when we post this, or maybe even the Facebook group at Practically Pastoring. We want to hear from you if you're into this pumpkin spice.
If you're not into pumpkin spice, we don't want to hear from you.
Also, if you are a comrade.
What
a
are
buddy
you
of mine. I'm trying to think about what's that thing that Russians call each other?
Comrade.
If you're a comrade as me with the candy corn, please explain your candy corn love as I do, because I have a lot of haters on the show who don't like candy corn.
All one of you can message Frank.
With that, with that being said, hey, please subscribe, like, all that kind of good stuff. Go to our YouTube, go to our Instagram, go to our Facebook, all that good stuff, and make sure you help us get to 500 on Instagram. We're almost there. I want to give out some of these shirts, as you can see, the beautiful model of Delmar wearing it right now. We want to get those shirts out, but we need to get to 500 people on Instagram. With that being said, please join us next week. I'm Frank Gill.
I'm Jeff Simpson.
I'm Delmar Pete.
I'm Andrew Larson.
And I'm Timothy Miller.
And we are Practically Pastoring. See you next time.
See ya.